Hi, I'm Gary White for Central Kentucky Television. I'm here with Dixie Hibbs, and we've been talking about quilts. She is a confirmed quilt addict, right? Confessions of a Quilt Addict. That's what we'll call this segment.
How's
that sound?
Yeah.
But now, so we have some of these quilts behind us, which were the full quilts
Yes.
you were talking about. We were talking about that, but now we're going to talk some more history of quilting and with some pieces, right?
The pieces, right. When you're a quilt addict, you want to buy or have a little bit of everything. I mean, and I will go in an antique shop or I'll go in a flea market and I'll look down and there's this shabby old quilt and it's got holes in it or it's righty on the edge, and I'll look at it and think, can I fix that? And I have talked myself into believing I can fix anything. And some of these things, my friends all just shake their heads, I can't believe you're doing that. I want to show you this one. This doesn't look like it's in very bad shape, but you should see the rest of the quilt. This quilt had green. Everywhere you see green here, it had a green in it in the 1870s. All of the green disappeared somewhere between 1870s and now. I had the same green fabric that I'd taken off another quilt. So I have put it back in there. So it's not as good as it was in the 1870s, but it's as close as we can make it. So this is a very, very unusual fine piece with lots of quilting again, heavy quilting. But and when I rescue something, I think I'm successful like that. And if you noticed in this pink, you'll see in this one, you have the same pink. Or similar pink, see? Very similar. We call these double pinks. There is a pink print on top of a pink background. And that's why they're called double pinks. There's double pink. You got it. You're a really good student here. The other thing about this one is that orange fabric. Ugly. Orange and green and pink. Do we normally do that? No. This is in 1860s to 80s. They call it cheddar, like cheddar cheese. And you'll see cheddar quite often in the old quilts. And when you do, you know that you've got an old piece. This is another piece of cheddar, and it's got some serious problems. You have dirt, you have some kind of stain. There's a stain of some kind, and over here is a bad stain. I have rescued this piece. The rest of the quilt I was able to fix, bind, and sell just like this for people who want a very old 1860s to 70s quilt star, good shape, nice quilting. This one, I'm going to have to see if I can get that stain out before I take the time to find this cheddar. And I have pieces of old quilts that I have worked on before. I've been doing this about 20 years, so I have a house full of pieces. I have garbage cans full of pieces. And I'll dig in them and I'll say, whoop, there's my cheddar. I'll take that out and I'll fix this. Now, when I fix it, is it as good as it was? No, because you're never as good as you were before. But instead of throwing this away, I will be able to rescue it and somebody can enjoy it.
Wow. So cheddar is the coloring.
It's the color. It's all cotton fabric. That's the other thing I hadn't even talked about. 90% of all quilts made before 1940 are 100% cotton. And I say 90% because this quilt is wool. It's not a quilt, it's a piece. It's a piece of a very old, very fragile log cabin.
And the log cabin is the squaring.
The other thing about this that's unusual, you don't see any quilting on top of it. Well, this type of log cabin pattern, and it's very worn here, you see, they sew it to the backing, and they don't sew through it anymore. And so you've got a beautiful back on it. There's no stitches in it. So is this truly a quilt? Yes, it's a quilt. It has a front, a middle, and a back.
Interesting.
Often in the old ones, too, you'll find that they have, don't pull thread, Dixie. You'll find that they had a blanket in the middle. You had the batting, you had cotton batting, you had wool batting. A lot of our people have made mistakes over the years in washing their old quilt in hot water, and that wool batting just like that. And when it does, it takes the top and the back with it, so you have this very crumpled up looking quilt. You can take that apart and put a new batting in it, but you've got to be very careful, and you've got to want to spend a lot of time on it. These were not, I mentioned this is not cotton, this is wool, probably pants from the man family. This might have been a skirt or a dress, really. This might have been, again, a jacket or something, but all this is wool. And this is very attractive when you're primitives. If you've got a house with primitives, all of these quilts go well with it, but things like this really do on that part.
Wow. So a lot of times, do you find that a lot of quilting was taking the scraps of people's old clothes? How it started, or is that?
No, well, it started because they wanted to keep warm, for one thing. They're layers. China, quilting actually probably came from China when they were making the vests and the jackets. They know that insulation, having the different layers of things, kept you warmer. And it came to Europe, and from Europe it came to America. The problem with quilting in the early years, you didn't have a lot of fabric. Fabric was all produced usually in your own home, or at least in a shop down the street. You didn't buy it from Europe, or you didn't hardly get it in your general store. As fabric became more available, then more people made quilts. They want the bright colors. The big difference in colors and things from like this period, let's pull this one up. This one right here, this is very bright. This is 1930s. 1930s. This is 1890s. You see the difference there? Now, it wasn't they couldn't make a red. At the time, there's a little bit of red in here. This fabric is very, very worn, and for some reason, I got hooked on fixing this. And I've been taking these squares out of other pieces and putting them in here. This one is not finished, yes. I got tired of picking out and putting back, but I will finish that one time. And I think I do it for two reasons. I respect the work that someone did years ago creating something. And then two, it's a challenge, it's a problem, and I'm a problem solver. So that's where we're on that part. On that.
And that's kind of too, tell someone about the period too, because back in older days, they didn't, bright colors wasn't something that people did.
No, and the thing on that too, bright colors got dirty easier. You know, today we go through our clothes in the washer every day. If you had to ever, those of you that might remember, my mother had a wringer washer, and I never had the wash tubs that we did it by hand, but washing clothes was a real difficult thing. They wore a lot of dark colors, the blacks and the browns. They brushed the mud and stuff off their clothes. You did have some bright colors in the middle 1800s. I'll show you some here in a minute. I've got another thing here, but the majority of them in the late 1890s were going to be the morning prints, which are the little black and white things, and these dark colors, like the bow tie. Now, the bow tie gets its name from the fact it looks like a bow tie.
I see it.
Right there. But there you have this bright blue. These are blues, blacks, wines. This is red, but there's often a lot of wine in that period. Again, these are all similar in age.
Okay.
That's
interesting.
I'm going to jump on to the 1930s, but I'm going to say a little bit about the 19-teens and 20s. There is a break there from 1900 to about 1920. There wasn't a whole lot of quilts made. You could go buy blankets. You could buy other things you needed. They just didn't seem to make as many quilts in. They made crazy quilts for decoration, but they didn't seem to make as many. The 20s, they were still making quilts. They got their patterns from the newspapers. They would, the Kansas City Star newspaper was one that everybody wanted to see the patterns there. I'm sitting here looking at the pink shining through that poor thin fabric.
Yeah.
Had nice to look at. And then you had your patterns. You used them. You shared them with your friends. You took your quilt to the fair. You showed it off. You always made your children or grandchildren a baby quilt and things like that. In the 1930s, quilting went from being a fun, artistic thing to do to being a necessity. No one had the money to buy blankets. No one had the money to buy a present for somebody. Often your church women would make a quilt for somebody getting married. Maybe your neighborhood women got together. I think the other thing they couldn't afford was psychologists and psychiatrists. So the quilting group handled some of your problems. You talked it out. You got a little advice from somebody who'd been married longer. You shared your scraps and your experience with them. And everybody went home happier. During that time, there was a lot of interesting variation going on. People were getting these bright colors, as we mentioned earlier. This particular quilt is known as Grandmother's Flower Garden. I think you might hold it right there. And you can see this is a diamond version of it. This is the regular version of it, the big round. It's all octagons, same pattern, just it took one piece. Look at the red in the middle here. That's one octagon. Six-sided, I guess, 2, 4, yeah. And they took that and made it, sextagon, I guess, made it into different patterns. This one is a big one, but this is a 1940s, late 40s. This is 1930s. This is 1930s. Now, this one is difficult to see.
Wow.
They took all kinds of prints.
Yeah.
It isn't, you had lavender here, you had a row of blue and white, and then wine. And it's kind of all runs together. It's the same pattern as this and this and this one. This is one I saved, did a lot of work to save it, to make a table pad or something. And what I like to tell people, if things get worn out, don't throw them out. Let's look and see what we can save of the best part of them. This is the same pattern as those.
Wow.
I could do a whole quilt show on just Grandmother's Flower Garden. The other pattern, favorite pattern of that period, was the double wedding ring. And for some reason, I didn't bring you a double wedding ring, and I should have. It is circles made with little pieces. Same time, 1930s. This is a dahlia. It's kind of hard to see maybe. You've got the yellow, and this stands up. It's three-dimensional.
Huh, yeah.
You can feel it. And this was a favorite pattern at that period. They would do a whole quilt with a dahlia.
And they all have the three-dimension? Okay.
What that is a piece that's about this wide that's gathered up, and that makes it stand up.
Okay.
These are stars with names on them. These were made somewhere. I don't know. I don't think Kentucky, but it could have been. They can call this a Texas star. The way it's made, it's not a Lone Star. It's a Texas star. This is feed sack on there. These are names people embroidered on there, probably, again, either raising money or making what we call a signature quilt. All of these, different names, different things. Ruth L. Van Campen. I don't know who Ruth L. Van Campen was, but she's still alive on this quilt.
My parents got one for, I think it was their 40th wedding anniversary, maybe. That have all their children on there and the year they're born and everything.
Right, on those people. Well, those again are 1930s and 40s on that. During that time also, Depression did a lot of things for a lot of people, and one of the things it did, it really stimulated the marketing of the chicken feed people. Chicken feed sacks. We talk about feed sacks, we're talking about chicken feed sacks.
Okay.
These were this kind of muslin, you can feel it here, rough muslin.
Yeah.
Beautiful prints on it, look how bright they are.
Yeah, that is
Again, the big bright colors. This is another one. These all, you would go to the store, and in 1930s and 40s, my grandfather went to Ice's Produce. I remember in the 40s because I wore clothes that he got. He would go and buy chicken feed. The feed came in a sack that was printed with colors. Maybe my grandmother wanted to do curtains. She'd tell him, I want blue and I want 4. That meant she had to get 4 chicken feed sacks, so that she'd have enough to make the curtains. And then, of course, you always had scraps. So the scraps went into quilts. A lot of people, I know people listening to me, have worn feed sack is what we call them, feed sack clothes. Because that's what a lot of children went to school with, a lot of people, even their underwear. When you didn't have any money and you had a chicken feed sack, you could take it and turn it into what you needed to wear. But these are really, when I come across something like this, I love to show people. Now that isn't chicken feed right there. See how smooth that is?
Yeah.
And usually you can tell by feeling them, but that particular one isn't, but these others are now. Feed sack quilts. Some people collect just feed sack quilts. And they're on there.
There's a lot of history with them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If you, and the names of them, there's Lafayette's peel, apple peel, and there's Grant's favorite, a Little Giant, which is what was referred to Grant. Lots of different names of quilts refer to politics, what was going on at the time. I think the flowers were so important or so favored in the 1930s because people didn't even have money to buy flowers or to raise flowers. If you were lucky and lived in the country, you had your wildflowers. I think that's one reason we see a lot of flower quilts in the 1930s. The double wedding rings in the 1930s too. What I brought here to show you is what I'm working on. I do not have it finished. These are the pieces I'm using. This is the way the quilt looked.
Wow.
Yeah, well, some of it's still good. I can take it apart. Here's your batting. Remember I said you have to have the top, you have to have the batting, and this is very thin. Today we think of a quilt much thicker. This is thin, this is cotton. I wouldn't have been surprised if it had been wool, but this was cotton. These are the colors of the 1890s, the wine, see the blacks and the wines. This little print you see in that period a little bit of yellow, and I was able to buy a large piece of that at the flea market in Louisville at New Year's Eve. I'm really happy to use it because I need it to repair. Now I have this big piece that I'm working on. This one came out of, it's a log cabin quilt. As you can tell, it goes round and round. All these are the logs of the log cabin. Most of the time you have red in the middle. I noticed here they have yellow and white, and I don't know, some kind of plaid, but they say they normally put red in the middle because it's the center of the home. And the hearth or the fireplace is the center of the home.
Okay.
Needless to say, I have replaced some of these. I still have to do some work here and right down here. This is the back of another piece of that same period, 1890s. See how bright that is?
Yeah.
I can take that and I can work that in and fix this piece here that's gone and this piece. The main thing too, I can take the other scrappy pieces apart, take some of these off, and put these in where I need it. And when I get through, I will have a repaired log cabin piece. I have not bound it by hand. I've gone on and bound it on machine. If I were a truist, a person who was truly restoring quilts, I would do it by hand. I would only use, and these fabrics all are the same period. I do that. I use the fabrics the same period. You can't usually see where I fixed them. But I'm not a purist in this. I am fixing it so somebody can use it. And if I do a lot of handwork on it, I have to charge more for it, and they may not be able to afford it. So I try to keep that price down as much as I can. But even the back, look at this. This is 1880s quilt.
That's great.
Now, that's a long time ago. And whoever made it is gone. I mean, they've been gone a while. I'm not sure what family didn't want it. If you don't want your quilts, find someone in your family who does, because somebody will. And if you don't, find someone who loves quilts, because it's important that they continue. As you said, the history's in them, the ability to give enjoyment and pleasure, to give pleasure to others, just like all these colors. Today, if you were to go to the nursing home for a family member or a stranger, if you pulled out one of these old quilts from the 30s and 40s and showed them to them, they would evoke memories. They would think about their life on the farm or in their grandmother's house or whatever. And that's what we really should be doing in life, is remembering the good times. And sometimes the best things came out of the bad times, because if we had not had the Depression, we wouldn't have all these wonderful 1930s quilts. They would have been going out and buying blankets and everything else.
That's right. We wouldn't have it. So
All
as we said, I've been talking with Dixie Hibbs, who is a quilt addict, about all the history, and there's a lot of history, so make sure you maintain your quilt or get passed on to somebody to have it maintained.